The deck under your boots is humming. Sailors are running. The loudspeaker is shouting words you can barely hear over the engines. And far above the clouds, something is falling toward you that you cannot yet see. It is a little after 10 in the morning, June 4th, 1942. You are standing on the flight deck of a Japanese aircraft carrier near a speck of coral called Midway, and you have less than 2 minutes left to live without knowing it. This is the Battle of Midway, and in the next few minutes, the most powerful naval striking force on Earth is going to be destroyed. 4 carriers sailed into this fight at the heart of that force. By the time the sun went down, all 4 would be burning hulks sinking into the Pacific. To understand how that happened and why historians still argue about the exact minutes, you have to go back to the morning when the men on those decks believed they were winning. Start with the force itself. The Japanese carrier fleet was called the Kido-butai, which simply means the mobile force, the striking arm. 6 months earlier, these same carriers had crippled the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. They had ranged across the Pacific and the Indian Ocean almost untouched. The pilots aboard them were among the most experienced naval aviators alive. They had not lost. They did not expect to start now. Their plan was to seize Midway, a tiny American base northwest of Hawaii, and to lure what was left of the American carriers into a trap. The man in command at sea was Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo. Above him, the architect of the whole operation was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who had warned his own government not to wake the sleeping giant of America, and who was now trying to finish what Pearl Harbor had started. But the Americans were not where the Japanese thought they were, and they were not blind. In a windowless basement in Hawaii, a team of codebreakers led by Commander Joseph Rochefort had been chipping away at the Japanese naval code, known as JN-25. They could not read every word, but they could read enough to know a massive operation was coming, aimed at a target the Japanese called only AF, Rochefort's team. Suspected AF was Midway. To prove it, Midway was told to radio a fake message in plain language, complaining that its water purification plant had broken down. Days later, Japanese signals reported that AF was short of fresh water. The trap had a target now, and it belonged to the Americans. So Admiral Chester Nimitz did something audacious. He sent his 3 available carriers, the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the wounded Yorktown, patched up in just 3 days to wait northeast of Midway. They would ambush the ambushers. Nagumo had no idea they were there. Now, picture the morning. The Japanese launch their first strike against Midway itself. Their planes come back needing to rearm. American land-based bombers from Midway attack the carriers and are slaughtered, achieving almost nothing. Then comes the worst news for Nagumo. An American carrier has been spotted nearby after all. He now faces an agonizing choice. His decks are crowded with planes being armed and fueled and rearmed, bombs and torpedoes swapped back and forth, fuel lines snaking everywhere. A carrier deck in that state is the most dangerous place in the world. One spark, and it becomes a furnace. This is the moment everything turns. And it begins with men who knew they were going to die. The American torpedo squadrons attacked first. A torpedo bomber is a slow, heavy plane that has to fly low and straight at the enemy ship to drop its torpedo, which makes it an easy target. Leading Torpedo Squadron 8 off the Hornet was Lieutenant Commander John Waldron. He brought 15 planes in low over the water. Japanese fighters tore them apart. Every single one of Waldron's 15 aircraft was shot down. Of the 30 men in them, exactly 1 survived. Ensign George Gay, who floated in the sea under a seat cushion and watched the rest of the battle unfold around him. Squadron after squadron of American torpedo planes attacked. Almost all of them were destroyed. They scored not a single hit. It looked like a catastrophe. But look up. While those doomed torpedo planes were drawing the Japanese fighters down to the surface to chase them, The sky high above the carriers had been left almost empty. The combat air patrol, the screen of Zero fighters meant to guard the fleet from above, had come down to the water to make those kills. And at that exact moment, out of the high blue sky, the American dive bombers arrived. Dive bombers do the opposite of torpedo planes. They climb high, then plunge almost straight down at a ship, releasing their bomb at the last second for accuracy. Two groups of them, one from the Enterprise led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, one from the Yorktown, found the Japanese fleet at almost the same instant. McCluskey's group had nearly run out of fuel searching empty ocean. He found the enemy by spotting a lone Japanese destroyer, the Arashi, racing to rejoin the fleet, and simply followed its wake like an arrow pointing home. What happened next took only minutes. The dive bombers fell on the Akagi, the Kaga, and the Soryu. 3 of the 4 carriers, their decks packed with armed and fueled aircraft. The bombs hit ships that were essentially floating bombs themselves. Fires exploded down through the hangars. Within a span of just a few minutes, 3 of the 4 great carriers were mortally wounded and burning out of control. The 4th, the Hiryu, hidden by clouds, survived a little longer and launched a counterattack that fatally damaged the Yorktown. Then, that afternoon, American dive bombers found the Hiryu too. By the next day, all 4 were gone. Aboard the Hiryu, Vice Admiral Taman Yamaguchi chose to go down with his ship. Now, here's where you have to be careful with the story, because the most famous version of it may not be true. For decades, the battle was described as the fateful 5 minutes. The idea that the Japanese carriers were just 5 minutes away from launching a fully armed counterstrike of their own when the bombs hit. That victory was that close to changing hands. That dramatic image comes largely from a memoir by Mitsuo Fuchida, a Japanese officer who had led the Pearl Harbor attack. For years, his account was treated as gospel. But in 2005, the historians Jonathan Parshall and Anthony Tully published a study called Shattered Sword, built on Japanese records rather than memory. They showed that the Japanese carriers could not have launched a full strike in 5 minutes. The planes were not spotted on the decks ready to go. The 5 minutes from victory was, in large part, a story told afterward. The truth is less cinematic and somehow heavier. The Japanese were not robbed of certain victory by a freak of timing. They were undone by a chain of choices, by superb American code breaking, and by the sacrifice of men in slow planes who never scored a hit, but who pulled the enemy's guard out of the sky. Gordon Prange's earlier history, Miracle at Midway, called the outcome exactly that. A miracle, but it was a miracle built on intelligence, courage, and luck stacked together. So what did it cost? The figures vary between sources, but the Japanese lost all 4 fleet carriers, a heavy cruiser, hundreds of aircraft, and somewhere around 3,000 men, including many of the irreplaceable mechanics and veteran aircrew who were the soul of their naval air power. The Americans lost the carrier Yorktown, a destroyer, and roughly 300 lives. It was not an even trade. It was the kind of blow a navy does not recover from. Japan would never again go on the offensive across the Pacific the way it had. The initiative passed to the United States and never went back. Think about what that means. 6 months earlier, the Japanese carrier force had seemed unstoppable. In the space of a single morning, in a fight decided high above a piece of coral most people had never heard of, that force was broken, and the long, terrible road back across the Pacific began. Everything that came after, every island, every landing, every year of the war in that ocean, flowed from this one morning, and it turned, in the end, on ordinary men, on codebreakers in a basement, on a destroyer's wake, on 15 torpedo planes that flew straight into death and changed everything precisely by failing. George Gay, floating alone in the water, lived to tell what the others could not. The deck stopped humming a long time ago. Those ships are 5,000 meters down, dark and silent, with the men who never left them. But the ocean you have never had to fight your way across, the world that turned on those few minutes near Midway, is still here. The least you can do is remember why.